Immigration is such an interesting conversation because I did want to maybe do a video discussing this a little bit because I do think there's a lot of naivety on this subject. Because people, that's where the kind of coexist movement kind of came from, where you have people that look at it very mm, dishonestly. They are very idealistic about it. They're not honest with themselves. And the reality shows, and it has over the course of human history, some cultures are incompatible with one another. This is why I think trade is such a valuable asset. It's a way to have some level of respect, decency among two different countries with vastly different cultures. But trying to force them to live among each other is the absolute worst way to handle it. Okay. If there is no, it doesn't matter where you're at. If there is no assimilation done, and I don't care what political, um, like where you fall politically, it's the facts of the matter. You're ensuring, if not immediately, eventually there is going to be some great conflicts, which is going to equal suffering on either side. Okay, if it's one thing for people to go to a geographical area and they have a set of shared culture, but for them to have vastly different cultures and for them to be kind of stuck living among each other, all you're doing is ensuring conflict. This is something that leftists get wrong. This is what some people that are leftists that call themselves libertarians get very wrong and have got wrong historically when talking about this subject matter. Okay, Trump had some interesting things to say. I think a lot of people are fed up about this subject, and people are becoming a little more honest about it. But let's look at this real quick. Trump had this long post. It says, "Happy Thanksgiving, salutation to all of our great American citizens who have been so nice in allowing our country to be divided, disrupted, carved up, murdered, beaten, mugged, and laughed at, along with certain other foolish countries throughout the world for being politically correct and just plain stupid when it comes to immigration. The official United States foreign population stands at 53 million people, most of which are on welfare from nations or from prisons, mental institutions, gangs, or drug cartels. Again, I have not vetted that. I have no idea how truthful that is. They and their children are supported through massive payments from the patriotic American citizens who, because of their beautiful hearts, do not want to openly complain or cause trouble in any way, shape, or form. They put up with what has happened to our country, but it's eating them alive to do so. A migrant earning nearly a migrant earning 30,000 with a green card will get roughly 50,000 a year, or rather in yearly benefits. That's interesting for their family. The real migrant population is much higher. This refugee burden is the leading cause of social dysfunction in America, something that did not exist after World War II. Failed schools, high crime, urban decay, overcrowded hospitals, housing shortages, and large deficits. As an example, hundreds of thousands of refugees from Somalia are completely taking over the once great state of Minnesota. If you've been out there, he is not entirely incorrect. Somalian gangs are roving the streets looking for prey as our wonderful people stay locked in their apartments and houses, hoping against hope that they will be left alone. The seriously the seriously retarded governor. This is not me saying this, guys. I am reading this directly from his post. The seriously retarded governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, does nothing, either through fear, incompetence, or both, while the worst congressman woman in our country, Ilhan Omar, always wrapped up in her swaddling hijab, and who probably came into the USA illegally in that you are not allowed to marry your brother, sheesh, does nothing but hatefully complain about our country, its constitution, and how badly she is treated. When her place of origin is a decadent, backward, and crime-ridden nation. Which is essentially not even a country for lack of government, military, police, schools, etc. Even as we have progressed, technologically, immigration policy has eroded those gains and living conditions for many. I will permanently pause migration from all third world countries to allow the U.S. system to fully recover. Terminate all of the millions of the Biden illegal emissions, including those signed by Sleepy Joe Biden's auto pen, and remove anyone who is not a net asset to the United States. How they're going to determine that, we'll see. Or is incapable of loving our country and all federal benefits and subsidies to non-citizens to our country, denaturalize migrants who undermine domestic tranquility, and deport any foreign national who is a public charge, security risk, or non-compatible with Western civilization. Those goals will be pursued with the aim of achieving a major reduction in illegal and disruptive populations, including those admitted through an unauthorized and illegal auto pen approval process. Only reverse migration can fully cure this situation. Other than that, happy Thanksgiving to all except those that hate, steal, murder, and destroy everything America stands for. You won't be here for long. I wanted to read that in its entirety because there's a lot of that he said, which, again, it doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree with Trump on various other issues. Doesn't matter. One thing is for certain, that if you've lived long enough, your country is, depending on where you're at, the demographics have shifted so much to where it's an unrecognizable place. The shared culture there has it's just not as much a thing. Where you live, depending on where you live, we're at this state where, I probably was the last generation. My generation was the last generation of youngsters that, depending on where you're at, I know there's some exceptions to this, maybe those in rural areas and such, but like, we used to play outside. Like, that was a thing that we all did without fear of, your parents, like, when before the lights come on, or around the time the lights get on, you need to come inside. In fact, they were telling, it wasn't even that you could do that, it was you needed to do that. Don't be cooped up in this fucking house playing the video games all day. Get your ass outside. I want you on them bikes, playing basketball, go do something. Just get the fuck out of here. That was y'all's experience. That was my experience growing up. And our generation was probably the last one where that was a thing. And I say this as someone with a child. Understanding how screwed up the world is and our country is right now, I would not dare have my children out there completely unsupervised running around the town. Absolutely not. Hell no. And it's sad that that's how it is. But in order to be honest about it, we have to talk about why we are approaching raising our children that way. And it's because, well, you live in a rather unrecognizable place. It's not the same America that you grew up in. The demographics have changed fundamentally. And when I say demographics, you can talk about the racial aspect of it as well. Yes, that is fundamentally changed for sure in some areas. Absolutely. But it's not just that. We're talking about a cultural thing. Why you have people in this area, like, where, again, used to be this commonly shared, generally speaking, people had their disagreements, but there was this commonly shared culture, right? Ambition, working hard, again, capitalism, private property rights. And if we can't agree on that, at minimum, not to say there hadn't been leftists that were living in this country prior to, it just wasn't as prominent as far as them, not about merely disagreeing, they actually vehemently disagree and despise the culture and would like to replace those fundamental principles that brought us all together regardless of race. So it's something that, how they reverse that, I really don't know. But I do think that, and where I agree with Trump and where I agree with others, as I talked about this, you have a lot of people living amongst each other that are culturally incompatible, and that's why it's so much turmoil, so much conflict. And on the other hand, you have folks that they do one of two things. They ignore that because it's not comfortable for them, right? Like, white leftists are, in some of these areas, are the worst with this particular thing where they know something exists. They themselves wouldn't even dare engage into this foolery, but they talk about the world as if it's not what it is because they don't want to. It's more of a confirmation bias thing. They don't want to admit that their immigration policy was a failed one. They don't want to admit that the coexist thing is utter horse crap. They don't want to come to terms with that at all because it will force them to have to admit some very uncomfortable things. Maybe they don't want to be around certain types of individuals, right? This is why this whole coexist kumbaya stuff is one of the more silly things that Americans started to adopt. Like, I've done a video on this, and I remember back in the day, it was really controversial when I would say this, like when I would tell people like I'm not an integrationist, and people would get mad because again they're coming from this like civil rights era kind of approach, and they look at integration like this net positive and only a net positive, and I'm like, I'm a realist about this situation. People wanting to live among people that are similar to them is the best case scenario, but forcing people to live among each other when they despise each other and have cultural incompatibilities does nothing but ensure that there will be conflict. That's all that you're doing. That's it. So for me, we got to be honest about it. So at minimum, I agree with where Trump is and some of the things that he's saying with regards to this particular topic.